Picture it, 1904, war with Japan. Not ideal really, particularly not for Russia. You see, the Japanese were rather good at this whole naval warfare business. The Russians, not so much, no matter. Tsar Nicholas II had a plan. A brilliant plan. He would send his Baltic Fleet, the pride of the Russian Navy, all the way to the Far East. They would show those pesky Japanese what's what. There was just one tiny problem. The fleet was, to put it politely, a bit of a shambles. Oops, Doggerbank and the fury of the North Sea. The journey did not get off to a good start. Imagine setting off on a, let's say, delicate diplomatic mission, and accidentally firing on your own allies. That's essentially what happened in the Doggerbank incident. Convinced they were under attack by Japanese torpedo boats, they weren't. The Russians opened fire on some British fishing trawlers. Thankfully, nobody was seriously hurt. International relations, however, took a bit of a battering. As if shooting at fishermen wasn't bad enough, the Baltic Fleet also managed to bring the wrong supplies. We're not talking about forgetting the biscuits here. They brought a supply ship designed for the Arctic, to the tropics. Imagine the heat, imagine the smell, imagine the sheer bewilderment of the poor souls who had to unload it. It was, in a word, a fiasco. Life on board wasn't exactly plain sailing either. Remember, this was the early 20th century. Naval discipline was, shall we say, a tad more relaxed. Alcohol flowed freely, livestock roamed the decks, and the general atmosphere was more akin to a floating circus than a fighting force. Add to this the constant threat of mutiny and you've got yourself a recipe for disaster. Now, one might think that a fleet on a vital wartime mission would prioritize essentials. Ammunition, perhaps? Food? Medical supplies? Not the Baltic Fleet. They brought along a grand piano, a printing press, and enough furniture to furnish a small palace, because nothing says we're ready for war like a rousing sonata and a freshly printed pamphlet. As if real enemies weren't enough, the Baltic Fleet was also plagued by imaginary ones. Every shadow, every ripple in the water, was mistaken for a Japanese torpedo boat. The poor chaps were like a group of nervous schoolchildren on a particularly spooky school trip, convinced that the monster under the bed was real. And then, there was the parrot. Yes, you read that right. Admiral Rossesvensky, the fleet's commander, had a pet parrot. And not just any parrot. This feathered friend had a penchant for mimicking the admiral's orders, causing confusion and chaos on deck. One can only imagine the scene sailors scrambling about trying to decipher squawked commands, while the parrot perched on the admiral's shoulder, looking smug. Remember that little matter of sailing to the Far East? Well, it turns out that steamships need coal. Lots of coal. And the Baltic Fleet was not exactly well stocked. This led to a series of increasingly desperate and hilarious attempts to procure fuel. They bartered, they begged, they even tried to buy coal from neutral countries, who were not entirely thrilled about fueling a belligerent nation, funnily enough. Navigating across the globe is no mean feat. It requires skill, precision, and perhaps a map or two. Sadly, these were not the Baltic Fleet's strong points. They got lost, a lot. They circled the same bit of ocean for days, mistook islands for each other, and generally bumbled their way across the seas like a troop of lost tourists. The highlight of this geographical tomfoolery was the Madagascar mayhem, where the fleet managed to turn a simple stopover into a logistical nightmare. Just when you thought it couldn't get any more chaotic, the 3rd Pacific Squadron arrived. Sent to bolster the Baltic Fleet, these reinforcements only added to the confusion. More ships, more men, more misunderstandings. It was a recipe for disaster. The joys of miscommunication. Communication is key, so they say. Unfortunately, the Baltic Fleet seemed to have missed that memo. Their attempts at signaling were the stuff of legend. Flags were flown upside down, messages were misinterpreted, and semaphore seemed to be more of an interpretive dance than a form of communication. The Indian Ocean presented its own unique challenges, specifically fishing nets. Yes, you read that right. The mighty Baltic Fleet, on its way to a decisive battle, found itself entangled in fishing nets. It was a scene of utter chaos, with sailors scrambling to free the ships while fish flapped about on deck. After months of misadventures, the Baltic Fleet finally met its end at the Battle of Tsushima. It was not a fair fight. The Japanese fleet, led by the brilliant Admiral Togo, was ready and waiting. The Russian ships, battered, demoralized, and hopelessly outmatched, were easy pickings. The result was a crushing defeat for the Russians, a humiliating end to a truly shambolic voyage. A legacy of laughs, the Baltic Fleet's enduring gift to naval history. The voyage of the Baltic Fleet may have been a military disaster, but it has left an enduring legacy. It is a tale of incompetence, misadventure, and sheer absurdity. It is a reminder that even in the midst of war, there is always room for a little laughter. So the next time you're feeling down, just remember the Baltic Fleet. Their story is proof that sometimes truth is truly funnier than fiction.